Hello everybody, welcome to this video tutorial. My name is Chandra Bellasio and here we'll show you some of the features of the dynamic model of assimilation at leaf level. Initially, I will walk you through the different spreadsheets in the workbook, and then I will show you some simple simulations of transients, and we will see how to simulate a few assimilatory response curve. The first thing we have to do is to open a spreadsheet file. We are working with version 3.6. We just create a copy. Let's say that this will be the video tutorial. When we open the workbook, there are different spreadsheets, and I will walk you through all of these as we go along. So let's start from the first one, input. Here there is a miscellaneous collection of all the inputs that are required to the model, and they are not in any particular order, but I try to group them as much as possible. So let's go through them quickly. So initially we have the electron transport parameters, the light intensity. These parameters define the curvature of the function defining the yield of photosystem 2. Some parameters defining the type of light reactions, pseudocyclic, the Q cycle. This is the stoichiometry of ATP synthase, yield of photosystem 1 at low light, and the engagement of the LDH complex. Then we've got the parameters of the stomatal model, the initial stomatal conductance in the dark, the soil water potential in the dark, and VPD in the dark. Then we've got the plant hydraulic conductivity, lumped parameter defining the response of the stomata, osmotic potential, and an initial value of tau in the dark. Then we've got CO2 concentration, volatility of oxygen and CO2, to the pH, mesophyll conductance, and then we've got this is a kinetic constant for acid constant of bicarbonate. Then there are a few anatomical parameters. This is the volume of the mesophyll, O2 concentration, the total pool of adenylate, the total pool of nicotinic coenzymes. These are the time constants for stomatal opening and closure, time constant for JATP, increasing in JATP, and the time constant for increasing J NADPH. And these are the Michaelis constants for ATP synthesis and NADPH synthesis. Respiration in the light, leaf thickness, this is the ratio of air in the leaf, so how much air, how much of the space of the leaf is occupied by air. Vc max is Rubisco maximum catalytic rate, and then some kinetic constants for Rubisco specificity, some kinetic constant for phosphoribokinase, kinetic constants for PGA reduction. This is carbonic anhydrase, kinetic constants for carbohydrate synthesis. And then there are the initial concentrations that are used to define the initial state of the leaf. These are assigned some plausible, realistic values, but as the model is cycled towards steady state, the concentration depends only on the kinetic constants that we saw a minute ago, and it does not depend on these initial concentrations, so they are not important to define the specific state of the leaf, but just to speed up the computation, just to allow the more these values are close to the steady state, the faster the model will reach steady state. Then we've got Rubisco activation. The first three parameters here define the shape of Rubisco activation, and then we've got the time constants for Rubisco deactivation and Rubisco induction. And then we've got some quantities that define the model run. So here we've got the time step. This is very important for model stability. And the total run time will define for how long the time simulations will last. And this time rise result interval is the interval at which the model writes a line. So when we will see the results of the simulation, we will have a line of results every 5 seconds. The minimum time that can be specified here is 1 second. So the model will not write at intervals below 1 second, even if it is calculated at 1.5 millisecond resolution. This part defines the response curves. So there is the model is set up that ACI curves are run first, and then after the ACI curve there is an A PPFD response curve. And here we specified what light do we want the ACI curve to be measured. We've got an initial acclimation and the CA of acclimation. And then we can define the time steps for the ACI curve in terms of external CO2 concentration. The time interval, this is the time that is maintained at each CO2 step. Then after the ACI curve is finished, the leaf is acclimated to prepare for the light response curve, and this is the CO2, external CO2 of acclimation. We've got the duration of the acclimation and the light intensity of the acclimation. And after this initial acclimation, then the light response curve is run at these time steps. This is just an example. You can change these time steps, and you can fit as many as you can fit in the spreadsheet. So I don't know, some 10,000 or so steps. So this tool is suitable also for fast response curve. You can put as many time steps as you want, and the time step can be as short as you want. Then we've got some other miscellaneous parameters. This is the function defining Rubisco inactivation at low CO2. Some kinetic constants of the RPP cycle, and some parameters associated with phosphorus, the total phosphorus, and the inactivation constants for the processes inactivated by phosphorus. And then last, we've got some simplification simplifications that can be used to speed up calculations. Here I'm just ignoring carbonic anhydrase, and with this simplification we can work at 1.5 millisecond resolution. So in the next sheet we've got light reactions. I try to keep this sheet as clean as possible, but you can unhide some of the calculations here. So this is just copying of the parameters from the previous sheet, so it's not really interesting. You can cover this back again. So the calculations here. So let's quickly look at these calculations. JSAT is not used in this version of the model. This is light intensity. This is the calculated yield of photosystem 2. This is the light incident to the absorbed light by photosystem 2 when cyclic electron flow is 0. This is the electron flow to photosystem 2 when F cyclic is 0. And this is the light incident to photosystem 1 when F cyclic is 0. And then we've got calculation. This chi is a quantity that comes into play when F cyclic is greater than 0. And then the model recalculates Y2 and I2 and I1 when F cyclic is greater than 0, and then calculates J2 and J1 when F cyclic is greater than 0, and JATP and JNADPH using values of S cyclic and F pseudocyclic. These light reactions quantity feed they define the light reactions, and they feed all the dark reactions. And in the sheet model we've got all the dark reactions. Let's look at this sheet in more detail. So this is a stock and flow model. So the basis of the model are the stocks that appear in this table here, and the flows that appear in this table here. There are some other quantities that are not grouped, and we will quickly look through them in a minute. So the basics of this model is that there is a current time, and at this particular current times the stocks are in this column. So the stocks that are actual at this very point in time are listed in this column here, and the flows at this particular point in time, they are listed in this table here. With the stocks, with the flows calculated at this particular point in time, the model calculates the variation of the stocks that appear in this central column here. And the stock at this point in time t plus the variation gives the stock at the next time point calculated in this last column here. There is 2 more columns for the concentration. There is also a pool that is calculated at leaf level using the volume of the mesophyll as a scaling factor. So let's have a look with a little bit more detail and the quantities in this table. So we've got CO2, bicarbonate, Ruby P, PGA, triose, ATP, NADPH, and ribulose 5-phosphate concentration expressed as millimolar in the mesophyll. These are quantities calculated for leaf level that are made time dependent. Stomatal conductance, JATP and JNADPH, Rubisco activation state. Carbohydrate synthesis as well is made time dependent in some formulations of the model. And then there are some quantities that are calculated from the common pool, like phosphate, ADP, and NADP. So from these quantities, at time t, the fluxes are calculated. And let's have a look at what fluxes are calculated. This is the actual ATP production rate, NADP production rate, respiration in the light, F Rubp, these are Rubisco constants, Rubisco carboxylation, Rubisco oxygenation, GDC reaction rate, ribulose phosphorylation, PGA reduction, carbohydrate synthesis, CO2 diffusion through the stomata, CO2 dissolution, carbonic anhydrase hydration rate, and the flux through the RPP pathway. There are some reactions at equilibrium, CO2 concentration in the mesophyll, Rubisco activation state at equilibrium, GS at equilibrium, JATP and GNADPH at equilibrium that are copied from the previous light reaction sheet, and carbohydrate synthesis at equilibrium. This assimilation divided by 3, I use it to compare with the rate of triose consumption, just very useful way to express assimilation. So let's look at the other sheet. So this integration sheet is nearly empty because there is only 10 seconds of simulation, and we asked the code to write results every 5 seconds. So we've got 2 lines of results, line 3 and line 4, and each line of results reports all the quantities that we have seen in the previous sheet. This is just copying all the quantities of the previous sheet in a single line at a certain time point. So the current time is copied in this column AG, so we know at what time it was recorded. Then we've got a plot, time plot. So again, we've got only 2 time points. We will see this how it looks like when we've got more than 2 time points. Of course, now we've got only straight lines. And then we've got ACI curves. Of course, there is no data now, so everything is 0. And APPFD curves. And we've got an additional sheet where all the data points of the light curves and ACI curve are copied for convenience. And we will look at this later when we look at the curves. So let's try and play a little bit with this model. Let's say that we want to drive the leaf at steady state. So let's try and see what happens if we actually do something. So we might want to set the values at time 0. So we can set the metabolite concentrations that we specified as initial concentration, and then he asks us whether we want to set the current time to 0, and this will reset the current time. We may want to clear the previous results to clean the integration sheet. And then we can ask him to, for instance, we can start doing an iteration. So this will progress the current time of 1 time steps. And in this particular case, it was 1.5 milliseconds. So we go from 0 to 1.5. We can iterate again and see how it looks like. And what the code does is copying these values at time calculated for the next time steps. It copies the values. The code copies the values back to the current time. So what the code does is just an iteration of the results, but all formulas appear in this spreadsheet, and they can be modified, and maybe we will look at this modification later in this video. For the time being, let's just stick what is ready, and let's just try and understand how it works. So we may get bored of clicking iterate, so we may want the code to run for a certain time. So let's say that we want to run for 30 seconds, and we want the code to write the results every 1 second. So we go back to the model and we say time course, go. We have just copied the values of time 0, so we don't want him to copy the values again. So in this case, we say no, and then it goes on and calculates our 30 seconds. I don't want to pause the video in this occasion. I just want to give you an idea of how long it takes to calculate, but I will pause the video later to avoid bore you too much. It should take a minute to calculate 30 seconds. Is simulated 30 seconds, and we can now see how it looks like. So it's filled 30 lines of this integration sheet, 1 line per each second for a total of 30 seconds. And we can look at the plots in time to see how it looks like. So the model has reached a reasonable steady state. And let's look at these plots, what they say. So we've got ATP and NADPH production rates, the actual and the potential. The actual appears as a dashed line and the potential is a continuous line. Stomatal conductance is going down, so this parameter, this output is not at equilibrium. PGA reduction, ribulose, phosphorylation rate, and carbohydrate synthesis. And this is the rate, and these are the equivalent concentrations. Here we've got the concentration of ATP and the concentration of NADPH. Assimilation rate, together with CO2 dissolution, CO2 stomatal diffusion. At this time scale, a time scale is greater than a second, all these quantities plot on top of each other. But if you do very, very rapid transients, you might see a slight difference between these 4 quantities. Rubisco activation state and FRUBP. And this is Rubisco rate of carboxylation and oxygenation, CO2 concentration, CI, and the concentration of bicarbonate in the leaf. This is a quick overview of all the quantities that are plotted here. So let's try and play a little bit more with this model. Let's see what we can do. So we saw the GS is not at equilibrium. So let's have a look at what's going on. So the GS at equilibrium calculated is 0.1617, and GS at this moment in time is 0.31. So with the timing that we have specified, it might take several minutes to reach equilibrium. But let's say that we want to go to equilibrium faster. So we can introduce a discontinuity. And here I want to show you a little bit how to play with this model. And try and show you how to use it a little bit deeper. So let's say that we want this value of GS, we copy it, and we paste it as the current value here. So the important, you can play with this column as much as you want. The important is that you don't modify any other column. So this column here, the values, the current values are the only values that you can modify? Well, actually, only up to here. These values are calculated and you cannot modify them. And it's easy to understand what you can modify because in the formula bar there is only a number. In all other cases there is a formula, so you never want to touch the formula. You can only modify numbers. So let's play a little bit more here, and let's say that we want to go back in time. So we go back to time 0. We manually set time 0. Now we can do our time course again, and we had specified that we wanted 30 seconds to be calculated. So here we can ask the model to recalculate our 30 seconds from time 0 to 30 seconds, and let's see what happens. So I press time course. I don't want to copy any of the values because I'm good with the values there. And we just go on for 30 seconds. The model has calculated 30 seconds now, and let's see how it looks like. So it's much more smooth than before. GS is closer to the equilibrium value, and quantities are approaching steady state. Of course, the longer time we allow, the more these quantities will be close to steady state. So this is the basics of the model, but it's a bit boring, of course, because we just allow it to reach steady states. It's not too much interesting. The interesting part is when we perturb the system. So we want to have a look at how to perturb the system. I like to perturb the system when a true steady state is reached. So perhaps I want it to be even closer to steady state before I perturb it. So maybe I put another 100 seconds here, another 70 seconds, and I wait for another little bit for the model to reach steady state, but a better steady state, and I continue my time course without copying the values. The model has now simulated 100 seconds. We've got some reasonable stability, well, some reasonable for the sake of this example. Of course, depending on the nature of your question, you may want better stability. But for the sake of this example, we're good with that. And say that we want to simulate a step, a rapid change in some quantities. And for the sake of this example here, let's say that we reduce CO2 concentration from external CO2 concentration from 600 to 400. We could change any parameter like light, VPD, soil water potential, any parameter. Here we just change CO2 concentration, for example. And then we say that we want to simulate an additional 30 seconds. So from 100 we go to 130 seconds. We keep all the rest the same, and we just say continue the time course without copying the values. And we got to 130 seconds. Let's look how our first step change looks like. CI has gone down, CO2 concentration has gone down, and we've got an initial decrease in VEC, Rubisco carboxylation, but then a stabilization, and an increase in FRUBP, decrease in PGA concentration, increase in ρBP, and so on and so forth. So you've got all these transient changes in the modeled quantities that can be followed. Let's do another example just for the sake of this tutorial. Let's say that we decrease light intensity to 150. So we go from high light to low light, and then we want to simulate another 30 seconds. So we go to 160 seconds. And we then press time course without copying the values and see what happens. Now we've got another 30 seconds. We can look at the time plots. Simulation has gone down. We went from high light to low light. ATP production rate and NADPH production rate have gone down a lot. And now the actual rate of ATP production is very close to the potential rate of ATP production, because we are in a condition where the major limitation is light limitation. The consumption is very close to the potential. Stomatal conductance goes down and CO2 concentration goes up, and ATP and ATP concentration goes down, and so on. So this is the basics of how to use the model and simulate transients. There is a feature to calculate curves that you might find useful. So you can simulate traditional gas exchange experiments with this model. We have seen in the input section that this is specified in this part here. So we can specify the light intensity for ACI curve, the initial acclimation, and so on. I want to do a very short curve with you, but we don't need to make it real. For the sake of this tutorial, we can content with a very short light curve, because I don't want to stay all day here waiting for the light curve to happen. We can make short acclimation here, 60 seconds here. Initial acclimation, relatively short. And we can shorten. This would not be the time intervals that I use for real curves, but this is just for the example. We want to just have a look at how it looks like. So let's summarize what I did. I want an ACI curve measured simulated under 1500 micromoles of light intensity. I want an initial acclimation of 200 seconds at 350 ppm of CO2, and then I want the CO2 concentration to go up to 400, then down to 300, 200, 150. Don't need this much resolution. Let's make a few less points. And then we want an acclimation of 200 seconds at 1500 ppfd and 400 ppm CO2. And then we want a short light curve measured at these concentrations. We don't need so many points for this example. This is enough. And each step is maintained for 60 seconds. So we go back to the model, and we want the curves to start. And as you press the button, the curve will start from the very point the model was. model has now finished calculating the curve. I don't know how long it has taken, let's call it 20 minutes, but I left the computer here unattended for a bit longer. So let's look at what happened. So in the integration, we've got a line per each second of calculation. So we asked him to write a line per each second. So he wrote some 1300 lines. In the time plot, we can see the gas exchange experiment. He started from where we were, so from 160 seconds. He didn't override the previous results, so we can see the previous acclimation. We were at low light, so first thing he did was to increase the light. This was not quite enough to reach steady state, so the curves will probably look a bit funny. We can see that A was not plateaued, and so was JATP and GNADPH. And then we can see the ACI curve here. This decrease in CI. And as we can see, the difference between JATP and VATP becomes progressively wider as we go down CI. But there is also some quenching of JATP going on here. So the model responds both with the separation between VATP and JATP and the decrease of JATP. And then when the ACI curve is finished, we go back to 400 ppm, CI goes back up. There's a little bit of acclimation, and then there is the light curve here. And during the light curve, the difference between VATP and JATP becomes progressively smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And CI becomes closer and closer and closer to CA with the simulation going down. So this is a typical plot of the curves, how the gas exchange experiment looks like. In this sheet here, the model extracts, the spreadsheet extracts the relevant line for each of the two curves. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points of the ACI curve, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points, 6 points and 6 points of the APP FD curve. And the line copied here will be the last second of the time step of the curve. Generally, he is precise in copying, but sometimes when the acclimation is very long, and when the time steps are very long, I'm talking about half an hour per time step, there might be a little bit of offset between the experiment itself and where the curve is copied. So if you see that this output does not match what you would expect, you can always change this offset here. This offset is the time at which the experiment has started. So you can put 1 second more, 1 second less here to fine-tune the calibration of the line that was copied, if there is something odd. But for most intent and purposes, it works. We can see the curves copied here. This is our ACI curve. We can see that the ratio between VC and VO changes as CO2 concentration goes up. simulation goes up, and the difference between the ATP and JTP is smaller and smaller as CO2 concentration increases. It's plotting, everything is plotted against CI here for consistency with the traditional gas exchange measurement. And probably what do we comment on here? FRUBP goes down a little bit. FRUBP goes down a little bit together with RUBP. All the rest is pretty straightforward, so we can have a look at the light curves. What to say here? Simulation goes up with the light intensity. The ratio between VC and VO is maintained, while the difference between VATP and JATP becomes higher and higher. Probably this funny shape is due to the fact that we didn't wait enough for the full acclimation at high light. So we would expect a more smooth increase in assimilation. And therefore we cannot really comment, but we still would expect this sigmoidal shape of PGA. Stomatal conductance goes down at low light intensity, and CO2 concentration approaches CA. So as light is very low, CO2 concentration approaches 400, which is the CO2 concentration under which we simulated the curve. ATP goes up with light as well as NADPH, but not as much as ATP. And FRUBP goes up with light, together with triosis and RUBP. The rest is pretty straightforward. Next, I want to show you how to modify the spreadsheet. So the aim of this model was to allow the user to be able to change the model according to his or her particular needs. That is why I coded it in Excel. And I want to show you one example of how you can change the model to modify it for your research question. So one of the things that you may want to do is to change the dynamic quantities. So the dynamic quantities are those quantities in this table from line 3 to line 70. And the iterated cells are those in cells from A3 to A70. So everything is in these cells gets iterated to the time t. So let's say that you don't want to simulate the dynamic behavior of GS, so we may want to take GS out of this set, and we may put GS there. And then we consider that GS, instead of being a dynamic quantity, we just say that equals the value at equilibrium. Simple. Then we want to put another quantity here. We may want to call it count, and the value at time t we say we start with 0, and every iteration the value increases 1. And here we just say, yeah, what we want is that at time t the value will be the time 0, the value at time 0 plus the variation. So we can start playing with this, and we can show that if we iterate the model, the counter will go up. And this to make it work, we need also to equal this to the value at equilibrium. So everything is calculated right. Every time we iterate this, the counter goes up. So if we want to do a simulation, let's do a very simple simulation. We clear the results here. We're done with the curves, we clear the results. We set t0, we set the current time to 0, and the counter here is taking the value from GS, because it doesn't know that we changed it, so we just put it back to 0. And then we want to do a quick simulation of, say, we want 10 seconds, and we want to do this simulation. I'm figuring this out as we go. I don't have a plan for this, so I'm curious to see if it works. Let's do this short time course of 10 seconds. We have just copied the values, and we look at what happened. Simulated our 10 seconds, and is incrementing one counter every time step. So he has counted 600 time steps, and we should see in the integration sheet, so where the GS was, so the GS, look for the GS. The GS is not GS anymore, but it's our counter. And he's telling us how many iterations were done at that point in time. So this will count the number of iterations that were required to reach this time point. I hope this is clear. It's a very, very simple example how to modify the spreadsheet. Don't want to limit your fantasy. You're very welcome to try it out and figure out new things, change the equations, change the parameterization, change all the rates, and see what happens. I hope this quick tutorial was useful. Thank you for watching, and I wish you all the best with this, with your research, and I hope this will be very useful for you. Thank you.